This is the LatinNews podcast. I am your host, Richard McCall, here in Bogota, Colombia. Our very special guest this week is Anand Persad. He's in Guyana. He's the editor-in-chief of the Stabroek News newspaper there. We've had him on the show before, discussing obviously incredibly important things in Guyana. It's a great pleasure to have you back.
Thank you. Thank you for having me back.
Well, it's important. September the 1st, we had the elections. Irfaan Ali, the incumbent, he won with around 55% of the vote. And of course, well, could we say this is a ringing endorsement? Or, you know, I think there's been a bit of a mix-up in Guyanese politics of late.
Yeah, thanks for having me again. It's a clear re-election victory. Whether or not you can say it's a ringing endorsement, you'll have to have some reservations about that because, there was still a substantial split in the country. He's gained 55.5% of the vote on a lower turnout and clearly on the backs of having 5 years of oil revenues. So when you consider that, the president has had 5 years of oil revenues and the freedom to spend as he wished, and the fact that, they had been anticipating maybe even a far better return, verging on maybe a 2/3 majority, I would think that this was not a ringing endorsement, and it still, underlines that there is this split in the country, ethno-politically, and that a significant part of the populace still remains unconvinced about, his program and his plans. And after having had 5 years of oil revenues to spend, I think he will have to do some introspection as to what exactly this means and what he needs to do to reach out to the people who still remain resistant to his sort of views on the way forward.
It's an interesting one. I saw it was on the 29th of September. He was named as a Times 100 sort of emerging leaders and so on. So this must give him a bump.
Oh, sure. And I think if you're sitting on the type of wealth that we're sitting on and the opportunities and the fact that everybody is coming here precisely because of that oil, I always point out to people that, we've never had a sitting U.S. Secretary of State visit this country. And in a year and a half, we had three. We had Rubio, and, we had, three visit in less than 2 years, which I think underlined how crucial we were to what was happening here. And so everybody's interested in the fact there are enormous growth opportunities and polls. So I think polls of our growth. So we are definitely attracting the interest. And I suppose being, named one of Times' 100 people of interest is one of those, attributes and accolades that go along with who we are. So, we look out for more of those. But at the bottom of it all, I think he needs to show that he can run the country in a way that not only manages the wealth properly, but sustains the economy and expands it in different directions, reorienting it from oil and gas and improving the livelihoods of people who continue to cry out for job opportunities and the rest.
So, we can still see that even despite 5 years of massive infrastructure investment, there is the wealth disparity and, well, I guess significant poverty in Guyana.
Yeah, so clearly if you looked at the Gini coefficient here, you'd see definitely there's a widespread between the haves and the have-nots. And based on even the latest international data that's available coming from, the World Bank and the IMF and other places, upwards of maybe around 40% of the people live in varying degrees of poverty and want. And we, of course, and I think I'd spoken about this the last time we were here, we have embarked on a project and we are now into the third year of the project where every week we visit different communities all across the country and we speak to people about how they're managing. We speak to 10 people every week, and invariably 6 or 7 of those people say, we're taking licks. This is very difficult to make ends meet. Sometimes we have to make decisions on what meals we can have every day, whether or not we can have protein 3 times a day or just once, how we can manage our medical needs. I might have an elderly parent living with me. They have to have, the same things that I need to have. So trying to manage your household, trying to get children to school, trying to make sure you can cover your transportation needs. We see that day in and day out. And I think a lot of people have commented on that. And raised it with the government and the presidency about how difficult it is for those people to make ends meet, so that even after 5 years and verging on nearly 6 years of oil production, that is a significant section of your populace continues to suffer significantly in terms of the cost of living. And this cost of living has been pumped up, ironically, by the fact that you have a significant increase at the top of the people demanding the same kinds of goods that those at the bottom are seeking. So when prices rise for them, their income doesn't necessarily grow up, but the income for the people up at the top is expanding, so they can afford it. And that obviously drives up prices, and that is something that people down at the bottom have a hard time addressing.
And these, the people down at the bottom, the Afro-Guyanese, the people who delivered 25% to the We Invest in Nationhood, the new party that only sort of existed 3 months prior to the elections. Is this who we can say are voting that way?
Yeah, so that was an enormous accomplishment. But I would say that the poverty is not only in Afro-Guyanese communities. The poverty is reflected across the board, including in Amerindian communities, which would be mostly the indigenous population, and in Indo-Guyanese communities. So really the question was, who is separated the most from their traditional constituency? And I think that's where you get the 25 figure from, because the We Invest in Nationhood party was able to capture the imagination of a lot of people who look at the lifestyle of the lead of this party and say, well, we could be having it at a Lamborghini. We could definitely have much transportation and circumstances. So they were sort of, I think, caught up in that kind of moment and that belief that, this man is going to improve our standing. So I think based on what the figures look like, you can say that a significant number of people who would have voted for the traditional Afro-Guyanese-led party, which would be APNU, separated from APNU and went to WIN. But WIN also captured a significant amount of votes in indigenous communities where poverty is also a significant problem. It maybe did not make much of a play in Indo-Guyanese communities, which have tended to be fairly deeply wedded to the ruling party and may then have been convinced that if the ruling party remained in office, their livelihoods were going to improve and their circumstances would have been better. So I think that's really what explains WIN's big play just after having been around for about 3 months. Even though the party was only there for about 3 months, it should be pointed out that the leader had been engaged in a very clever social media-based campaign that underpinned philanthropy, and he had been going around the country for the last 2.5 years, handing out things and making himself available. So that's why I think people got bought into this storyline that he would be able to improve their circumstances were he anywhere near to government. And he's now ended up being the likely leader of the opposition, which is a phenomenal return, considering that he's going to displace the traditional main opposition, which is a Partnership for National Unity.
Let's talk about this individual, Azruddin Mohamed, obviously formerly a strong supporter of the ruling party, the PPPC. And as you say, he has the national recognition by very careful, very outspoken, I would say, social media posts and traveling around the country. He's a known figure, but of course, there are certain things surrounding him, aren't there?
Well, yeah, quite a lot. And, it's like what happens when you fall out among friends. He had very close relations with President Ali and Vice President Jagdeo. Vice President Jagdeo is the General Secretary of the ruling party. And their relations were very close. He'd visit them at State House, and this happened only, I think, as recent as 2 years ago. So they got along very well. There are also reports that he financed parts of the party, particularly during periods when there was hardship. His father was a candidate for the party at the last local government election. So there are very strong organic ties with various sections of the party infrastructure. But things went south when he came to be sanctioned by the U.S. The U.S. Treasury Department, their Office of Foreign Assets Control, under the Magnitsky sanctions, which are very serious sanctions. Magnitsky are the most serious sanctions that could be applied by the U.S. And these were then applied to him under the Biden administration. And I think at that point, his relationship with the PPP began to unravel. So he's here under the cloud of US sanctions. There's been no indictment as yet, and people have raised queries about that. Why, if these sanctions are so serious, why has there not been an indictment in the US? Why has there not been a charge here? He has also been, of course, these sanctions, the Magnitsky sanctions, relate to the underinvoicing of thousands of ounces of gold that was smuggled out of this country to the US. So it also raised the specter here of how lax the authorities were here, that he was able to allegedly export all of this gold underinvoiced without us knowing about it. And, the tale has sprung up that, a convenient blind eye was turned to him over all of this period that the PPP has been in office, just to allow him to make his fortune and to have him be able to support the party in various ways. He's also been linked to various other things, including the alleged murder of somebody who could have possibly have been the subject of a mistaken identity. So he has been linked to quite a lot of nefarious things. And he may very well have seen running for office as an opportunity to be protected by the constitution of this country, which has enormous protections for the presidency. There are enormous immunities to the president. And, even if you ended up in parliament, you feel perhaps maybe there is, a greater level of protection for me from, being sought after by the US, being sought after by the law enforcement authorities. So he could very well have been convinced into thinking that it was better for me to run for office to protect myself, because it didn't seem as if he was naturally the kind of person who would be concerned about people living in very depraved conditions, because, he had a very flashy lifestyle, Lamborghinis and maybe Maseratis or, whatever is in his lifestyle. So there was a big disconnect between wanting to help the poor and the kind of lifestyle that I lived. So there are very interesting things around him.
Yeah. Did he have any actual sort of policies that he was presenting, or it was simply a protest vote?
Right, so that's simply a protest vote, and everybody's pointed that out. There is nothing underpinning this organization. So will it survive? That is, he came up based completely on this philanthropic outlook and visiting people. And because, you see, he was able to visit, when you're in the government and you visit an area and you say, oh yeah, look, this road needs to be done. You know what? Okay, I'll go back to my ministry and I'll discuss this with them, and, we'll see if there's any money in the budget. If there's any money in the budget, we'll put out a tender, and maybe in 3 months to a year, we'll come back and we'll deliver. When he's there, he can say, fine, I'll bring the wheelbarrows tomorrow and I'll start doing this for you. I have it right. He has been able to provide instant gratification for people. So when he goes, he knows what they need, and he will turn up there with what it is. If it's an electric bike, or if it's a laptop for this child who is working in school and didn't have access to Wi-Fi or the internet, he would deliver that. So he has come to be associated with instant delivery of his promises, which a government cannot do. So wherever it is he went over the last year, he was heralded as the incoming president. Everybody was saying, I'm going to vote for you. You are going to be our next leader. And he was hailed. And it was a very, amazing thing, but it showed how non-traditionally you can campaign on social media. And you can make your visits unperturbed to various places, unbeknownst to central government, and nobody knows what's going on. But a wave of interest is building here in you. And before you know it, it mushrooms into something. So, when he began to be seriously considering the election race, the government and everybody else is writing him off. You barely get one seat, or if any seat at all. But I think they had discounted what had been going on social media, and the fact that people had come to associate him with the ability to deliver things that they had not been given in all the years that the PPP has been in office, and certainly for this 5-year period, because they would look at themselves and say, we were impoverished at the start of 2020, and that was our condition at the end of 2025. So we are going to give this man a chance because he's done things for us. So there weren't very many policies underpinning anything. He delivered a manifesto, but it's easy for me to just really, go and organize a manifesto and plug in Guyana and oil and whatever it is, and you can deliver a manifesto for me. So the question now is, what are you going to deliver in Parliament? You are the opposition leader. Will this just really be something that, you're just there, you just be there, sort of like just holding the fort and pretending as if you're doing things, or you are actually going to try to build this into something that in the next election period or the next local government elections, you can show that you're quite serious about building this thing into a real movement that wins you the presidency at the next opening.
What a fascinating situation that there is a new political climate within Guyana, of course, by the arrival of the Win party, but at the same time, should they not actually sort of carry through anything as the opposition? There's the opportunity for the traditional opposition over these 5 years to, let's say, get their house in order again.
Yeah, and so that's been one of the problems. I think that's going to be really difficult for them to do. They really should be trying to work there. But one of their big problems was the fact that because they were so closely linked to this attempt to rig the elections in 2020, when they were booted out of office 5 months later in August of 2020, they didn't show any kind of recognition that they needed to fess up about what had happened. That is, come clean, say, okay, we're sorry about this. It seems as that there was an attempt to rig us back into office. We didn't really know about it, and we abhor that, and we are into for free and fair elections, and we apologize for anything like that. They didn't do that, and so that sort of like constrained them immediately to their base. Nobody was going to look at them outside of their hardcore base, and so there was no hope at that stage for them to sort of like to expand into people who were disaffected with this government over the last couple of years. So they are completely confined to their core. They made no attempt to make themselves electable. Their leader was thought to be not somebody who had a hope in hell of sort of winning crossover votes. And because they didn't work on that, what happened was there was continual deterioration within the party. A lot of their faithful left the party. People defected to the PPP. Obviously, the blandishments and the attractions of a PPP government with control over oil resources can attract a lot more people. Some of them went to Win. Some of them simply gave up politics. So when you have that kind of attrition and breakdown, clearly you have to expect that you're going to lose the election, and that was what happened. So can you rebuild from this now? You've not only not lost the elections, you've also lost the leader of the opposition, which is what people were saying you were going to be confined to. But things happened, it was worse than that. You didn't even win the opposition. You now have 12 seats. The opposition, the other two parties have among them 17 seats. So you have a lot of catching up to do. And is it possible? And I really don't see the way they are currently configured that is possible. They have to be broken down, and they have to rebuild over the next 5 years. And they have to do it with different personnel. Now, they've made a very smart move. They've put their parliamentary retinue under the charge of a businessman, a successful businessman, who was not somebody who was even associated with the party 3 months ago. So that's a revolutionary move. That's a recognition that we needed to do something really different here. So they put a businessman in charge of their parliamentary complement, and he does have ambitions, so he could very well end up running for leadership of the party. But he would have to show, of course, in Parliament that he is able to sort of to do things and to show some sort of like interest in steering a new path for the party. So they have it all to do, and we'll see what sort of impact they make.
Well, we should definitely move over to the key issue, I think, here. The oil, the oil, of course, that has been what a massive expenditure and what an opportunity for Guyana. But Exxon aiming for 1.5 million barrels a day, but as I believe it's still at 640,000 barrels a day. Tell us a bit about this.
Right. So there are now 4 platforms in the Atlantic. The 4th one started to deliver oil this year. So we could probably be up to maybe about 725,000 barrels a day. So that's what we're ripping out of the ground every day. And ultimately, they are looking for about 10 platforms. And so maybe going past 1.5, but 1.5 is the figure that they're sitting at the moment. Now, that's a phenomenal amount of oil being ripped out there. And there are 2 problematics here. Neither of those 2 problematics has been addressed by this government in any considered way. And it's problematic for Exxon, but they could care less as long as they have a full range and can do as they please. And that's really what's going on at the moment. Exxon has total leeway to do as they please, carte blanche. And so the problems for the government are twofold. That is, first, you're operating or you're approaching 1.5 billion barrels a day, maybe 2030, 2032. You're heading in that direction, but you headed there on a deal that is the most disreputable and discredited in the oil and gas industry. And this is the deal from 2016 that gives us a 2% royalty that allows you not to ring fence your project. So you have maybe 20 different explorations going on in the Stabroek block. And what you're going to be doing is continuing to apply for expenses to be written off against oil that is taken out of the ground. And there's been no change there. So the deal allows Exxon to just pay you a paltry 2% royalty, which really should rise as they sort of increase. There should be a sliding scale royalty. If you go over $1 million, we should have 3%. If you go over 1.1 million, it should go up to 3.5 or whatever it is. We are fixed at 2%. And we are also fixed at this arrangement where 75% of all the oil that is taken out goes towards what you call cost oil for them. So they can continue claiming cost oil as long as they continue exploring and as long as they continue developing. So all that is going to be left for you after 75% cost oil is what you call 25% profit oil, which is split evenly between us and Exxon. So they take their 12.5%. and we get 12.5%. So what we are going to get is 12.5% plus our 2% royalty, which comes from Exxon. So we're going to be getting 14.5%. So what we risk here is that all we are going to be having when we get to 1.5 million barrels a day is 14.5%. 14.5% of that entire tranche that's going to be taken out in that any given day. Now, that is the most disgraceful, most unacceptable deal whatsoever. This government has been pilloried for 5 years about it, about not forcing a renegotiation, which is possible under the 2016 agreement. It just requires both parties to be brought to the table. It really should be renegotiated. We should have a better deal. There should be a higher royalty on a sliding scale. There should also be what you call ring fencing, so that each of the platforms gives you the profit that should be available to you after that investment has been recovered for that platform. So let's say platform one, which was started up in 2019, by now we should be splitting all profits 50-50. There should be no more 75% takeaway for cost oil. So that the first platform should be giving us an even 50-50 split in revenues, and we would get that money up front. So that's the first major problematic. The other major problematic is we have shown no interest at all as to what the climate burden will be from the combustion of 1.5 million barrels of oil a day in whichever parts of the world that happens. We have to consider the climate responsibility, and we have to consider our climate responsibility here in this context. The president has sort of just fobbed that off by saying we are a net carbon sink because we have these huge forests, and that, so we are in no way at risk of adding to the climate burden. That I don't think is an acceptable argument, because those forests have been there from prehistoric times. Nobody's troubled them. They've just really been extracted on the basis of usable woods, and they've been there all along. What we need to do is to make sure that what we're extracting does not add to climate burden. And really, we should only be extracting what we need for our development needs and the orientation of the economy. It shouldn't be what Exxon wants. Exxon wants this right now, all of a sudden, and all right away, because it knows that maybe 40 to 50 years is really the kind of window that you have for light sweet crude to sort of like to carry away the market. But it's, in changing to non-carbon fuels, that demand will not be there. So we are really sort of like working towards ExxonMobil's agenda as opposed to what's best for the country and the globe.
So it sounds to me like you've got Irfaan Ali running alongside and very much hand in hand with Exxon. There's been no efficient argument to renegotiate, and of course he's using the excuses of the carbon sinks and so on. You did mention the reorientation of the economy. Of course, there is that huge risk of the Dutch disease for Guyana. And Irfaan Ali, I mean, he made an interesting, his presidential address was interesting about the sustainability of sugar and other products in Guyana, but really it's all oil.
It's all oil, and I don't think any time has been spent, any significant kind of thinking has gone into reorienting the economy. And I think we're seeing both of these serious problems here. We're seeing the Dutch disease, everything is being concentrated in oil. The major ports that we have here, everything along the Demerara, both sides of the Demerara River, which is one of our main rivers, a lot in the Essequibo area, everything is being concentrated in oil. And when you do that, when you don't invest significantly in other economies, you get tied in there, and that becomes a problem. I think we're also facing the human resource curse. That is, we're facing the resource curse in the sense that even though you're becoming richer, a lot of other people are becoming poorer. And that's really, like, again, this real big gap between the have-nots. So I think both of those things are going to be major problems, and we haven't reoriented enough. The fact that the president is still speaking about sugar is a problem, because over the last 5 years, sugar has just sort of like become a huge black hole, has taken significant subventions into the industry, not shown the returns. The average cost of production is way beyond the world market price. There's really little hope of turning it around. But because it's an industry that is so tightly wedded to his constituency, he will not do what would be the very politically difficult thing to do, which would be to say, fine, we're going to have to look someplace else and exit this industry because you have to find jobs to those people who might be out of one. But really, you should be looking for something over the last 5 years. You haven't been able to do this. They had promised to reopen 3 of the estates. They opened one, it's limping along, and they have failed on the promise to reopen the other 2 because it is just beyond possibility. You just can't reopen them because there's nothing there. Nobody will take them on. So they have failed on that promise of reopening 3 estates. They've reopened one, it's limping along. The other 2, they haven't as yet been able to sort of like to find some useful purpose to provide jobs to the people. And they've raised this argument that they have created 50,000 jobs over the last 5 years. There's no evidence of this. What they've done is to create what you call 10-day jobs, which may be maybe 12 to 13,000 people. What they do is really like an unemployment benefit. What they do is say, okay, I'll pay you for 10 days of the month. And if I need you to go and sweep the road here or do part-time porter work at the hospital or whatever it is, I'm going to call you. There's been no auditing at all of what actually happens, whether or not people do 10 days of work. But you are getting 10 days a month, which roughly translates to about, maybe $40,000 of, our currency, maybe $200 US a month. And that's going to maybe 10 or 12,000 people. So that has been really their major job creation, outside of the fact that ExxonMobil may have created maybe about 10,000 direct jobs for it and its major contractors. But outside of that, we have not reoriented sufficiently in any direction that veers in the direction of higher paying jobs, technology, services, and things like that. So I think he really has to do a lot of thinking about how that's going to be done and how he's going to partner with other people and to get us away from all of this investment in oil and gas.
And, these 5 years of incredible income has resulted in infrastructure work, obviously, infrastructure projects. But it seems to me that it's the way they're doing it is to please people or to let's say appease people as fast as possible. Is there any coherency to the infrastructure plan?
Well, we've argued about that because we don't see that, and I think these are prestige projects. One major project is going to be actually commissioned on Sunday, which was the new Demerara River Bridge. It's going to be commissioned on Sunday and traffic will go over it on Monday. Now, that's great. There definitely was the need for that. But it just underlines also how they operate. That is, their expectation was that this project would have been in place in the last year of the last term. So their expectations were that, sometime at the end of 2024 or early 2025, this project would have been in place. It's not in place up to now. So it was, again, an example of how poorly run these projects were. And in doing this project, what they did was to refuse to do an environmental impact assessment. For a project as huge as this, nearly at the mouth of one of the main rivers, you needed to do that. But all they wanted to do was to make sure that they were working towards the electoral schedule. And if you had done that study, it would have taken you up, maybe an extra year. But the project would have been done the correct way because it needed to have that sort of study. So what people are waiting to see when this thing opens up tomorrow is whether or not it alleviates in any way the kind of traffic hazards we've had with the previous bridge, which had to be opened up manually to allow ships to pass under and so on. This thing here will not require that, so it's going to be 24-hour running. But people say it will still lead to the congestion on the eastern bank of the Demerara River, which the government had promised to ease. So is your infrastructure leading to the results that you're expecting, that is an easing of the traffic woes on a major part of the thing? People are saying, no, it won't. So we're waiting to see on Monday. And then the government is going to be faced with the question of, well, why are you just building infrastructure and roads? You have to address how you can control traffic in different ways. If you build roads, what you have is what you call induced demand. People see, roads, I can get a car, I'm going to go along it, I'm going to motor. So over the last 5 years now, we have gridlock on the east bank of the city, and we now have developed it on the east coast of the city, which never was the case before. So what you've got is you're just simply sort of like creating roads, allowing people to just simply import diesel vehicles and gasoline vehicles instead of maybe looking at insisting that there should be EV vehicles, taking climate into consideration and so on, so that there is no holistic and no coherent whole behind the infrastructure. There's also another major project that you're involved in, which is what we call the energy project, taking the associated gas from these platforms and piping it to shore. Now, that has been way behind schedule, way over budget. A project that was meant to be maybe less than US 1 billion is now over US 2 billion. The pipeline that ExxonMobil built was built since last year, at the end of 2024. It remains empty because this project is not yet ready to receive the gas. So again, another major project which they had promised people that would result in a 50% cut in the electricity bills is far from being delivered. And there's no guarantee that it will actually do what it's supposed to do. And it's no like one of those, it's the most expensive public sector project in the history of the country. And the jury is out on what will happen with it.
And you said the idea is to cut power costs for people by 50%. I mean, it's a huge project. You'd think they would accelerate that. The challenges I also see, obviously, the implementation of major public works, such as the complete overhaul of the electrical grid. I think that's the other one, isn't it?
Yeah. So, and that again has been a long-running joke. That is, for 30 or 40 years, it has been said that our big problem is the transmission and distribution system. That is, because there is very little investment in it. What you can have here today, we have had over the last 2 years, we have had sufficient generating power. But what we don't have is a correspondent improvement in the transmission and distribution system. So invariably what happens is if you have a trip or if a car runs into a pole someplace, it brings down the entire system. So if your transmission and distribution system is fragile, unprotected, what you will have are these breakdowns. And it's something that they haven't been able to sort of get over. It's a major component of this gas to energy project, but the betting is it's not going to be done the way it should be done, and you will have these breakdowns anyway. So think of it, you can have this massive gas to energy project that is going to create 300 megawatts of power. But if you had heavy construction material come into contact with one of your overhead wires, the entire thing is going to come down. So because you have not protected your grid, and because your grid has a lot of old components, you're going to come down. And the last thing investors want is to have that kind of instability in their systems where production can't be guaranteed for a day. You have to invest in standby power, and you have all of these extra overheads that you shouldn't have in a properly functioning economy.
Well, I mean, all of this income coming in, you'd think they would be able to do these projects in a joint, a joint, putting them together at the same time so everything could work. But we've got a lot of criticism coming out right now here, and one becomes very concerned for the next few years. But another great concern, obviously, we have to mention it, is old Venezuela, the belligerent neighbor there, and of course, what is this U.S. build-up in the Caribbean? So, and they go hand in hand. How are people in Guyana feeling towards all of this?
Well, yeah. So, I mean, you have to be very sort of like concerned about it. So there are a lot of fears about what could possibly be leading here. For generations, we have lived with the threat of Venezuela next door. But things became more difficult over the last 5 or 6 years. Definitely under President Maduro, he really pushed the envelope, and he had definitely threatened. He'd begun building on an island in the Essequibo River, in one of our rivers that they had seized. And he had sort of like mobilized the military and so on. So there are great fears, but that was preceded by the fact that we had gone to the International Court of Justice for a final ruling upholding the 1899 arbitral award. So it could be that the court could rule maybe in a year and a half in our favor, at which point you then face a real jeopardy that, Venezuela may know that the game is up and they may try something. So, and so at some point, you need to have international support developed behind you. And so over the last 5 years, what we've been trying to do is to mobilize an international coalition of, friendly countries. The US has been with, whether or not it's linked to the fact that ExxonMobil is also here is another issue, but, the UK, France, Canada, and others in the EU have come out in our support. So we're waiting and expecting that this decision will go in our favor and better sense will prevail in Caracas and there'll be no attempt. But over the last couple of months now, this build-up in the South Caribbean Sea has raised concerns because it has now drawn Trinidad and Tobago, which is close to us, and Guyana into this web of intrigue. What are they really doing there? Two problems have arisen immediately. That is the rule of law being applied by the US. They've shot 3 or 4 boats out of the water, no questions asked. This is like the Wild West. And, I see a boat, I shoot, and I'd ask questions later. I don't even know who's on board. So, and that's a problem for us because, we don't want to be supporting that sort of thing. We expect due process to be observed and so on. And, there is this risk that if there is an attack on Venezuela, there could be some kind of military fallout on our side and on Trinidad, or there's also the possibility that there could be more people flowing over your borders, refugees, trying to get away from this. So we don't know, and we really need to have some sort of grip in it, what exactly the Trump administration is doing there, because regime change seems to be something that has come up in various circles. And I can't see how you can mobilize 4,500 Marines for an anti-drug operation and F-35s and a nuclear-powered submarine and, the whole lot. So we have to watch very carefully. But as of now, what we're trying to do is to make sure that Venezuela does not find any pretext or becomes encouraged to cross the border, and that we can have a ruling from the International Court of Justice that is in our favor, and that should finally settle for us our control of Essequibo for once and for all, and be able to develop it completely as well.
And so Irfaan Ali has talked about a need for a mature conversation about revealing really what the U.S. intentions are. I think we can all agree that it's not entirely, the drugs, the war on drugs that they're doing there. I mean, there's a lot of, as you would say, gunboat diplomacy going on. There's the desire for regime change. And of course, Guyana sitting alongside is very much at risk of anything happening. I mean, it's a very precarious situation. I'm sure I know the answer, but Guyana's armed forces, nowhere up to a standard to be able to protect a border.
Right, yeah. So really, we're really just in a defensive posture. I mean, most you can do is make it difficult for them to feel that they can just come across without any kind of repercussion. What we need to do is to patrol intensively. And over the last couple of years, we have tried to improve our surveillance weapons, surveillance ability, both in terms of patrolling the seas and aerial surveillance. So we've tied up deals with the UK, France, China, and India, and the US, and we've had new assets. So really the most we can do is just improve our surveillance. And some of these Western countries have shown interest in making signs, sending patrol vessels here to sort of dock and as a sort of like a sign of solidarity. One doesn't expect boots on the ground if there were to be a problem, but Brazil, France, the UK, and the US have shown very often solidarity with us. They've been quite high-level visits by the US, but I don't think any of that is being read as a recognition that people will come to our aid. But I think the signs are being sent to Venezuela that there is going to be some sort of repercussion if there was to be any kind of thing. And the fact that Trump has sent all of those vessels there, I think President Maduro is obviously thinking twice about what's going to happen. Yesterday, he sought further emergency powers for himself, which tells me that he feels that something is going to come down. So if there were to be an attack, he's taken emergency powers. What he will do with those powers were there to be an attack, one doesn't know for sure.
It is a truly fascinating time right now for Guyana. Obviously, as we've said, there's plenty of criticism levied at the incumbent Irfaan Ali. Is there anything could we say there's anything that he's doing right?
Well, yeah, I think definitely there's a lot that is being done in a way that, okay, we should consider, the expenditures and so on. He's clearly a man who can reach out very well to people. And you can see that. And he's built up a very significant international profile, which is why is taking him on. He makes very good use of that. And that's what we need to do to also push back against Venezuela and other problems that we had. So when you turn up at the UN and you deliver for us, that's good. So I think locally, there is a lot that's going on in terms of improving things in various communities, and people are grateful for that. What I think he's sort of missed the boat on is recognizing that the fact that we have all of this oil revenue sort of puts us in a position where we should consider that our major problems at the moment are Venezuela and the fact that we also have to manage our relation with ExxonMobil. So that we should do this together. That is, there should be no more adversarial politics. There should be no more PPP, PNC, trying to duke it out and to see who will win the election. That is, we should find a way to sort of to lessen the kind of toxicity that goes on with this very deep polarization that we have. He's not reached out to the opposition in the way that somebody who has everything going for him would. Now, if you look at this woebegone opposition here at the moment, the fact that the main opposition has been reduced, this here is your opportunity to reach out to them and say, hey, I can see the situation that you're in. We're looking at the future of the country. We'd like to have sort of unanimity here in how we approach Venezuela, how we approach maybe national development going on, how we orient the economy. So let's find a way to work together in Parliament that isn't the way that we've been in the past. That is this very toxic, high level adversity. That, I think, is what he's failed to do. So you can go about communities and you can engage them and so on. But if you don't get over this divide, which meant that 45% of the people still didn't vote for you even after 5 years of oil wealth, it shows that people still don't sort of feel invested in your campaign. So you can do as much as you like, but if you have that kind of division in the country, I think it only festers. And I think that's one of the things that he has to spend more time on.
I think that the final point there, if Ali can't show the oil growth and the benefits, then there is the concern of a rise of populism or a populist actor. Of course there is.
Right. Yeah. And so that's exactly what this party with 25% of the vote is waiting in the wings to do. And, since the election result, he's gone around still. Mr. Mohamed, he's still visiting all around the country, handing out things and making it clear that he wants to tap into that. So I think the risk for Mr. Ali is that once you have that sort of discontent festering, that other people will tap into it, and a party that got 25% of the votes in 3 months can definitely be a risk at your next local government election, which is maybe a year and a half from here, and certainly at your next general election. And that, I think, is what the party will have at the back of its mind.
Well, fascinating, as always, Anand. Thank you so much for sharing your unlimited knowledge about what's going on in Guyana. I wish you all the best. And of course, this saber rattling in the Southern Caribbean, hopefully it will come to some sort of positive and peaceful conclusion. Thank you for your time. And of course, everyone, tune in to go to the Stabroek News. Anand Pasod is the editor-in-chief there, the newspaper there. You can follow all news updates from Guyana. Thank you for listening to the Latin News podcast. Remember to subscribe and share, and we'll be back in a fortnight discussing further issues from the region. I've been Richard Mohamed. Thank you, Anand.